Today, we're diving into a really big topic, global inequality. But what if I told you that the map of inequality we all kind of have in our heads is just completely out of date? Let's take a look at what the new one looks like.
So, just for a second, when I say global inequality, what's the first image that pops into your head? Seriously, how do you picture it?
Is it something like this? You know, a pretty simple, clean line that divides the world into the rich countries and the poor countries. For decades, that was basically the story we were all told.
But it turns out the latest data shows a massive, fundamental shift. The real story of inequality has changed, and the new fault lines, well, they're in a very different place.
Because, and this is the key, the biggest economic gaps are no longer between countries. The main battleground for inequality has moved.
And this number right here? This changes everything.
A United Nations report found that a staggering 2/3 of global inequality is now found within individual countries, not between them. I mean, just let that sink in for a moment.
So, this is what we're talking about, within country inequality. It's that economic gulf that separates the richest and the poorest people living under the very same flag. And that internal divide, it's now the main engine driving global inequality.
Now, to see how this actually plays out in the real world, let's look at the new economic giants, India and China. This is where the paradox is on full display.
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? Their incredible economic growth has created enormous wealth, and it's lifted millions of people into the global middle class. But at the exact same time, it has left millions behind, creating these societies of just extreme contrast.
But here's what's interesting. This inequality doesn't even look the same in both places. In India, it's driven more by wealth inequality, often tied to something as old school as who owns the land. Whereas in China, it's more about income inequality, which is linked to more modern urban and financial assets.
And to really get a sense of the scale of this, especially in India, look at this number. The richest 1% of the population there earns 75 times more than the entire poorest half of the country combined. That gap is almost impossible to imagine.
But hey, this isn't just a story about emerging economies. Not at all. This growing internal divide is a universal challenge, and we see it just as clearly when we turn our focus to the West. Let's take the United States. It has one of the highest levels of inequality among developed nations. Here, the top 1% controls a mind-boggling 40% of the country's entire wealth. And this isn't just about dollars and cents. It creates these huge gaps in access to things like education and healthcare, and that really limits the chances for people to move up. Okay, now let's hop across the Atlantic to the European Union. The picture here is a little different. Inequality is generally lower, and that's partly thanks to more active social policies and taxes that help redistribute wealth. But, and this is a big but, major disparities absolutely still exist, both between and within member states, and the global crises we've seen recently have only made some of those divides deeper. And this chart just lays it all out plain and simple. It's comparing the share of national wealth held by the top 1%. You can just see how much higher that bar is for the United States compared to the EU. It's a really clear visual of how different policies can lead to wildly different outcomes.
So, after looking at all of this, what's the takeaway? It's pretty clear it's time to redraw our mental map of global inequality. The lines we all thought we knew, they've been completely scrambled.
So, to put it as simply as possible, the biggest challenge of global inequality is no longer the gap between countries, but the staggering gap that exists within them.
So let's just lock in the three big takeaways from all of this. First, that old North versus South map, it's officially obsolete. Second, the vast majority of inequality now exists inside our national borders. And third, this internal divide is a universal feature of modern economies, everywhere from India to the USA. And all of this leaves us with one final big question to think about. If the heart of the inequality problem has moved inside our own borders, does that mean the most powerful solutions are now found there too? Definitely something to consider. Thanks for joining me on this one.